So hi everyone, my name is Priscilla Negreiros. I work for Climate Policy Initiative and I manage a very important project we have, which is the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which also we call it CCFLA. The alliance was created in 2014 within the UN, and CPI and myself, we got the secretariat from 2019. And our objective was basically how to increase the level of climate finance in cities. So we are doing a lot of work with our different members. We have around 63 members, from city networks to public and private financial institutions to organizations that we call enablers, so UN organizations, NGOs, foundations, and national governments. And our objective is to take all of these organizations that are working directly or indirectly with cities, trying to increase the amount of finance they receive for climate smart urban infrastructure and make them work better together. So basically amplify their ambition and trying to bridge the demand and supply that cities have in that field. So yeah, nice to meet you. Well, there are many different institutional and legal frameworks. It will depend very much on the country that you're talking about and on the cities. So I will try to answer this question highlighting two main activities that we are developing the Alliance in this sense. So basically to help institutional frameworks for cities to have more access to finance. So the first one is increasing the role of National Development Bank. So we have developed not long ago a research that actually tried to map how national development banks are today working with cities. And we think like national development banks have a key position because basically they are able to get access of public international funds for cities and even private funds that a lot of cities around the globe cannot access because of institutional and legal restrictions. So as you probably know, a lot of cities cannot have that. They cannot actually have access to multilateral development banks. And we think national development banks, because they know well the field, they know well the reality of the country, and often they know very well the context and like the restrictions and the legal frameworks that the country works on. They could be this tool or this facilitator to actually help cities to have access. So we know that a lot of developing countries have national development banks. They are very different between themselves. Some are just focused on infrastructure, some are focused on broader themes, but we need to, one, make sure that these banks are and have in their mandates climate related issues. So basically they have climate smart infrastructure in their mandate, and then they are able to work with cities, and then they are willing to. So we are working very much hard to make this reality and to change and to foster this activities. Another tool that I could mention that we are working on very much is basically aggregation tools. So we have a challenge within cities and climate finance is that a lot of small and medium cities, they cannot have access to finance. Sometimes they have a project ready to go, bankable projects, but the projects, as in the finance word they say, is the ticket is not high enough. So basically the project is not expensive enough. And what happens is that these cities where a lot of change could be made, climate smart infrastructure, in the climate smart infrastructure level, it's actually, it doesn't happen. So we are trying to gather and pull together aggregation models and mechanisms and tools that can help these cities to attract private and even international public climate finance through aggregation models. So these are two examples of institutional and illegal frameworks that could foster climate finance in cities, and that we can see, and we really believe they are very effective. Great. Yeah, like there are many barriers that cities are facing to have access to climate finance. I will sum them up in three main categories. The first will be institutional barriers. So a lot of governments and municipalities are unlikely to finance the infrastructure demands themselves due to budget restrictions and high levels of that. So a lot of cities, even big cities in developed countries, actually don't have enough money from taxes and own resources to fund climate smart infrastructure projects that could make the difference. So this is a big barrier. A lot of them actually, as a solution, go through their national governments, and if they can, through different sources of finance, so private sector, international, public money, so from development finance institutions. So we think one solution could be that at least the public money and finance could go directly to cities, because another challenge they face institutionally, it's basically that a lot of the multilateral development banks that could be a great tool for cities to have access to this finance, they don't go, they cannot lend and fund directly cities. They have to go for their national governments. So this is very tricky, because sometimes you have also a third challenge, political constraints within the country. So like the mayor is not necessarily on the same party than the leader of the national government, which could bring and hinder developments in infrastructure and climate smart infrastructure in the city. Also, as I mentioned, so another challenge in terms of institutional barriers would be that many cities cannot acquire debt legally. So this is more based on legal frameworks of the state. And then in that case, cities need to find other types of solutions. So, or for international public money, or through national development banks, as I mentioned, or even finding different financial instruments or that help them to raise finance and resources or then on, so such as like land value capture, for example. Another group of barriers and challenges are the financial ones, and I think these are the ones that we mention often a lot, which is the lack of creditworthiness in a lot of the cities, the lack of investor-ready bankable projects. So a lot of cities, they have ideas, but not necessarily have the projects ready and bankable to go. So basically to be funded by private or even public sector. So one solution here would be to invest more in project preparation facilities. There are a lot of different project preparation facilities, and in CCFLA, the project I manage, we have a directory mapping project preparation facilities, and we believe that these actors that sometimes are within multilateral development banks or city networks or NGOs, they can help cities with technical assistance they need to develop the projects, so the projects will be bankable, and they could even help and assist cities with creditworthiness. So we definitely think this could be a solution. And finally, I think the last group of barriers that cities face is the lack of general understanding of public and private sectors and how climate finance operates in the subnational level. So also, they are unfamiliar with private investments and with sustainable urban infrastructure in cities, and the proper cities' financial conditions. And sometimes they just don't know the opportunities there are there and there exist. And this applies for developed and developing country. So our work is basically to make sure that cities have access to that information, they understand better how the financial system works, and actually they can have access to climate finance globally. Yes, I think there are a lot of solutions and work precisely more on advocacy that can be done to climate finance. So I think it's on the amount of finance that today is sent and directed to cities. So CPI, Climate Policy Initiative, works on mapping and tracking climate finance worldwide. We know that globally we have around like more than 500 million yearly that is from private and public sources that it's actually sent and devoted to climate finance globally, which is a very low number compared to what we need. And from that number, we are actually working on a research to understand how much is for urban climate finance. And we know that it's basically less than 10% of that is actually going directly to cities and within cities boundaries. So we need more finance to go to cities. And this is very important because we need more concrete announcements of investment from the public sector itself. So basically, development finance institutions should be working more and directing more money to urban and climate smart infrastructure. And we know that a lot of development banks still invest in no green projects. So I think the message on advocacy in terms of the amount of finance should basically be, we need to increase the amount of finance. We have a lot of international public money going around. This money should be green. So it should be invested in climate infrastructure worldwide, not on other types of projects, and it should be like more tagged urban. So I think this is a big message. Another one for the private sector that we could work on advocacy, it's basically we need to adapt financial instruments that for cities to be able to use them. So basically what happens a lot is that a lot of banks are starting now to work with climate. So basically to work with green infrastructure and climate finance in general. And what happens is a lot of the existing financial instruments are not adapted to the needs of cities and of climate finance in general. So we need to adapt those financial instruments to respond to different levels of risk, to respond to different levels of length of the project. And we need to make sure that all the funds that exist in the private sector, which are very much needed, they can respond to the challenges that we have. So wow, arguments. Definitely, we have a lot of different arguments why we should invest in low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure. I will particularly say the case of cities. So first, 70% of the world population will live in cities by 2050. Most of the emissions also do come from cities. We have around 70% of worldwide emissions are coming from cities. And although this is a place that concentrates a lot of people and we will have a lot of infrastructure going on, cities are also the birthplace of innovation, of opportunity, and of ideas and creativity. So a big argument that actually is that we need to start to focus more work where the change needs to happen. In terms of resources and opportunities in investing low carbon infrastructure, there is actually a very nice report that went out from the IFC that shows that in numbers. And sometimes I think we need to see numbers to understand where the opportunity is. So basically, what they say is just on the city, the potential investment potential in cities in total, it would be around $29.4 trillion. And if we cut it by sector, for example, the renewable sector would be to 842 billion. So we know that there are a lot of opportunities for private sector, for public sector to invest in low carbon and climate infrastructure. And more than that, we know that the need is down there. So I think this is the main argument that we can use to argue that we need to change, and definitely we need to invest more in urban climate smart infrastructure.